pleasure to, well, I got to hang out with you today.
Yeah, we were shopping.
All right, yeah, so that's part of my remit. Whenever I interview someone, I must go shopping with them. So remember that, Wasafiri. Okay. So we're going to look at, we're going to talk to Safia about her work. This is her first, her debut collection, January Children. We're going to talk a little bit about that, ask her a few questions. We're also going to talk about part of a series of anthologies called The Breakbeat Poets, of which this is the third reiteration, Halal, if you hear me, and the thinking behind that. But Safia, let's start with your amazing award-winning collection. How did it come about? Because it does read like a collection. It's not just a gathering of poems. I was telling you that earlier. But how did it amass itself into a collection?
So is it, when did I realize that it was a collection, or when did I start working on the first poem?
I think both, because I want to tell them. I want to tell them a little bit about it, but I want them to kind of get a sense of the origin story of this book.
So the oldest poem in the book I wrote in 2012 when I was in undergrad, and I was doing a 30 poems in 30 days exercise with one of my friends.
At NYU?
At NYU.
Yeah.
And then when it started to come together as a project, when I got a sense of what the conceit was going to be, was when I was in grad school and starting to think about so for the Master of Fine Arts that I did, one half of my thesis was that I had to turn in a manuscript of poems. So at some point, maybe halfway through that program, I started to think, okay, this stuff that I'm doing is all kind of congealing into a single project. But also, like not to be an asshole, but I feel like I've been writing this book one way or another my whole life. To the point where when I finished writing it, I was like, well, there it goes, the thing I've been thinking about this whole time. Now what, you know?
So we met at, there's a writers' retreat for black poets called Kave Khanum. We met there. So where were you in the trajectory of writing the book when we were first years at Kave Khanum?
I didn't know yet that I was writing a book when I was at Kave Khanum. Kave Khanum was the summer after my first year of grad school, and I didn't know much like what I was doing in general. It was that first year of school was just really disorienting and disheartening, and it was like a very white academic space where I felt like I was being misread and misunderstood a lot, and I felt like my work was being treated like as an anthropological artifact and not as poetry. So I remember being like, wow, your culture, and I'd be like, it's just a poem about flowers, I promise. So I got to Kave Khanum, and Kave Khanum kind of rejuvenated me as a writer because it just felt so good to be around people that I had context with, that I didn't have to be like, here's what this black thing means. And I didn't have to like supply a glossary to everything that I brought in. And also people who were just giving me the benefit of the doubt that I knew what I was talking about, and that I wasn't just there to be some kind of weird ambassador for like an exotic culture.
Oh, you wrote some hits in Kave, I remember that. So
I had fun at Kave. I brought a really bad poem to Kusabani's workshop that first year though.
Oh yeah, me too. Don't worry about it. We all did that. So that's, I think everyone brings a bad poem. But so you're Sudanese heritage?
Yes.
You were born in America?
Yes.
You have lived in Kenya, where else? You said Switzerland, was that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I was paying attention. All right.
Then we talked about this while we were shopping today.
So tell me, how does that inform the book? Like how do all those places inform your identity and inform what you write about? Because you really, one of the things that was clear to me, you spoke about this in this book, and in many ways I think your personal book is a kind of thesis for Halal, if you hear me, in the sense of how do we understand the Muslim space. We don't really understand it, and there's a way that you've shared that makes it just look as a normal space, but seeing the intersectionality of that and seeing the spaces that are often not thought about.
So I think I'm going to challenge that question a little bit, because
go.
I don't think I was thinking or writing very much about Islam or Muslims at all in the January Children, which is part of the reason why the conversation around putting together Halal, if you hear me, with Fatima Asghar, co-editor of
Actually, on a first name basis, I love that.
But part of the conversation that led to even thinking of doing the anthology is that it felt like for so much of my life, the fact that I'm Muslim has been so compartmentalized outside of all the other things that I do. So I just wasn't in the habit of writing about it because I'm not very much in the habit of talking about it. It felt like a very private thing that was my business, and then, but somehow I was willing to work out all of my other like crises and neuroses in my poems, but this was the one thing that didn't come in because it felt like, in a lot of ways, the thing that I'm most insecure about. You know, yes, sometimes I feel like always I feel like I fail to perform my Sudanese-ness in an adequate way. I fail to perform my blackness in an adequate way. I fail to perform my femininity in an adequate way. But I like really fail as a Muslim, you know? I'm like not a good Muslim. So, but it felt like to admit that in poetry, or to even to start to process that in poetry would be like a sort of confession that I didn't feel safe making, honestly. I think it's not safe to be a woman in the world failing in a religious space. It's not safe to be a woman in the world in general. But the January Children, I think, was sort of prior to any sort of conceptualization of how my Muslim self exists in my writing self. I don't remember the original question.
No, you were challenging what I said, so that was fun. So, going back to the January Children, one of the things I noticed as I take a sip of water is water plays a strong thematic symbol inside of your work. Like, there's this great poem where you talk about the wind and love, and you talk about the Nile and it's being two spaces. And there's a way that each poem connects to each other, and it's almost like your body of work is a tapestry, almost like a puzzle that's put together. You have to actually read the book or you can read a poem anyway if you want, but what I notice is that there is a trajectory from beginning to end, and each poem informs the next poem, and then even a poem 10 poems on has echoes of a poem that you first wrote. And that intrigues me, but it also says to me that this is a complete book. It wasn't just an exercise in finishing, it was an exercise in delivering, like, as you said, those embarrassed spaces that you were sharing with us. Can you speak a bit about like how you made those connections and how water played a strong element in your work?
So to answer the question about water, love water.
Yeah. Cheers.
It's been just such a fertile, like, yes, metaphor, yes, image, but just like actual object in my life. It's, Sudan, Khartoum specifically, is where the Blue Nile and the White Nile meet to become the like capital N Nile. They're like, the river is just such a part of the infrastructure of the city. It's you see the Nile all the time. It's dirty. People wash their cars in it. People throw trash in it. But it's like this like historical, magical thing that also is just like a very real kind of dirty reality of where I originate. And also the Atlantic Ocean as a site of such like enormous trauma historically for like blackness holistically, and also as one of the main ways that I've been able to measure my distance from where I am and where I'm from, from my hostland and my homeland, whatever that might mean. Mm-hmm. So it feels like water, my whole life has functioned both as a site of this like enormous traumatic separation, but also as this site of like joining and coming together that also I think is like equally as important as this site of rupture. The book as sort of a cohesive project, I think just is a symptom of the way I function as a writer, as a person who makes things, is that I only know how to obsess. If I'm not obsessed with something, then I'm not writing. I'm like,
you're not interested.
Like watching TV, swimming, hanging out with friends, movies. When I'm obsessed with something, as I was obsessed when I was working on this book, I only know how to do the one thing. I need to just sit in it and live in it until it's exercised, and then I can finally move on with my life. But I cannot finally move on with my life until the obsession has been resolved in some way.
Right.
So it was meant to feel like one whole thing because that's how it was made. It wasn't like a collection of scattered poems that is meant to be like a time capsule of the time of my life. It was just,
energy
I like sat down to write a book and I couldn't do anything until I finished writing the book.
I think you told me that once. I mean, talking about that obsession, there is a key character that keeps being reintroduced throughout the poems.
Ooh.
Yeah, the singer. Did you say his name?
Abdel Halim Hafiz.
Yes. So what was the purpose of that? What was the purpose of that in sharing this? Because he is a romantic hero in Sudan, is that right? Is it?
No, he's Egyptian.
Egyptian, yeah.
He's
Egyptian,
sort
yeah,
of,
sorry.
in the Arabic-speaking world, he couldn't be compared to like a Frank Sinatra or like an Elvis Presley without the part where he steals from black people. You know, but he was just this like cultural boyfriend. Like everyone was in love with him, and he was like one of the most famous singers of his time. To the point where my grandma can still tell you where she was and what she was doing the day she found out that he died. He's that big.
Right.
And the day of his funeral, it is reported that at least 14 Egyptian girls committed suicide because he was just like this phenomenon. So I didn't have that relationship with him growing up because he died 20 years before I was born, give or take. But so we didn't overlap in that way, but it was this sort of background music to my entire childhood that I never registered. There was maybe a gap between when I was a child, just growing up hearing like all this music that my mother and my grandmother would play. And then as an adult, living by myself for the first time, like without a roommate, anything, just by myself, I started to really miss having that sort of just like holistic sensual experience of like the way the home I grew up in like smelled and what it sounded like and what it looked like and the kind of curtains my mother hung and the kinds of incense she burned and the music she played. So I found myself reaching for those things to recreate them because I just felt so out of context. And one of the things that I rediscovered in my hunt for all of the old sounds and smells and everything was the music of Abdel Halim Hafiz. But I was able to, in the new context of me as an adult, as an American, as a black person in America, as a black person in the Arabic-speaking world, which is also a site of enormous trauma, then I was able to to see for the first time how radical he was doing actually was, where the main thing that is important to me about Abdel Halim Hafiz, like yes, he's very hot and he's a great singer, but he addressed all his love songs to al-Asmarani, which is a term of endearment in Arabic for a brown-skinned or a dark-skinned person. And he's singing in the 60s and 70s. So it's in this racist-ass world, I don't have to tell you how radical it is that he's specifying the darker girl and as he's singing. So, and there's like plenty of philosophizing out there. People are like, he didn't mean dark, he meant like brunette, but it meant a lot to me to hear what felt like me being named, and that because people like to pretend that black people don't speak Arabic, that there are no black people in the Arabic-speaking world. So it helped me a lot to just kind of find a term for myself in the Arabic that I grew up speaking that was not a slur, which is rare. So then that was a new entry point to me, where like yes, nostalgia, yes, my mom and my grandma liked him, and I just joined the line and didn't have a crush on him, but also.
There's a deeper significance.
There's a deeper significance, and it's a radical significance, and that felt like an entry point to me to find language to start to talk about the worlds that I grew up in.
So talking about the worlds you grew up in, because you grew up in many worlds, and we discussed that. If you look at my book, this is my copy, so nobody's going to get it. But if you look at my copy, I mark my copy right here.
Oh, thank you.
All like that.
I love seeing people's notes.
So the things that you say, every language I borrow is a borrowed joke. I speak. And my mouth is my biggest dream. I love that line.
Thank you.
You have this other one. And another Sudan was missing. So there's a sense of, I've been doing this research on a thing I call metics, which are resident aliens, where you belong to many different spaces, or you are part of many different spaces, and each one identifies with you in an awkward way, for want of a better word. They don't perceive you as the native self, even though you are in many ways native to that space and native to another space. And what I notice is that in this book you give us an understanding of what that liminal space feels like. So I guess the question to ask, the natural question to ask for that is, what was it like growing up in these different spaces, and why did you choose poetry as the conduit to express what it was like?
What was it like?
To live up in these different spaces, and why choose poetry to express?
It was deeply weird and lonely, and but the thing about, because it was like that my entire childhood, it's not like I grew up in Sudan and then went out into diaspora. I grew up in diaspora. I grew up all over the place. And so as a child, as this being the only experience I'd had of what it was like to be in the world, I thought it was just like that for everyone. So I thought it was normal to be in spaces where no one spoke the language that I spoke at home and no one looked like me. And, so... And I think there's something to be said about like the resilience of and adaptability of children, where in a way, I'm glad that part of my life happened when I was young enough to take it. I think if I were now to be put in that same environment, I don't know if I would make it through the same way. But I think for a really long time, I looked to this like fictional alternative idealized version of myself as like a way to like an imagined resolution to all the things that I was going through. So like I feel uncomfortable and out of place and awkward and whatever, and all of that would be solved if only I had grown up back home. All of that would be solved if only my Arabic were better, if only I were a better Muslim, if only for so long,
a superhero version of yourself.
Yeah, and for so long I thought the fix was that easy. But the thing is, I grew up going and spending a fair amount of time to Sudan. It wasn't this like idealized abstract thing. I was like in Sudan all the time. So I wasn't like getting off the plane and being like, aha, like here she is at last. I would get there and it would be fine. It's a real place. I love it. It's great. But it's a country with the failures that any country has and the successes that any country has. So it's like a nice place to be, but it doesn't like resolve anything for me on like a metaphysical cosmic level. I'm still as fucked up in Sudan as I am in America, as I am in Germany, as I am wherever. Because it turns out it's not about like national belonging as a solution to how weird it is to be a human. It's just like how it is to be a human. And poetry, I don't like anything else. I love poems so much, even just as a reader. I love poems. So as
I say this because I've hanged out with you for a bit, and I know you in other spaces. And you have like a very good photographic eye. When people talk to you about their stories, and stuff like that. So why poetry? Why, because you have a creative lens in other spaces. Why?
Because poetry feels like the most elastic space to push language to the limits of what it's able and unable to do. I think with fiction,
somebody write that down. That is good.
But with prose, you're kind of bound to the ways that language is meant to work. You're bound to the ways a sentence is supposed to work. At least I speculate. I can't write prose. This is just what it looks like on the other side of the.
That's what I've heard.
But it feels like poetry makes a lot more space for failure and for experimentation and for stumbling, because that failure still makes something new and makes something valid. And so all I do in my poems is fail. But that's part of the process. Now all I do is attempt and reach and fail, but
that
still a poem comes out,
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. So you failed with these poems, and somehow they won awards.
Failed so hard.
Yeah, they failed really well. So after that, it's a claim and all that. You're invited with Fatima to write this book.
No, we just came up with it hanging out, and then we emailed Kevin Colwell and we're like, hey, we hear you have an email address at Haymarket Books. Can you do us a favor?
Okay. And what was the response? So what was coming into your inbox when you suddenly gave that call out? What did you understand? What made itself available? And what will we get in this anthology? Something that we rarely see actually
Yeah, so for context, Halal, if you hear me, is an anthology of poems and essays by Muslim writers who are women, who are queer, who are trans, who are gender nonconforming. So everyone Muslim who is not a straight cis Muslim man, who are usually the only people who are allowed to say anything about being a Muslim. And when Fatima and I put the call out, we thought we were going to have like 3 poems and then we were going to put out a little pamphlet and it would be cute and we would move on with our lives. And then the response was overwhelming. It was so overwhelming that it took us like 2 years to get through the emails because we both still had our other jobs and our other lives and are just like not good at administrative stuff in general. But
so the infrastructure you had couldn't sustain.
We got 2 interns, which helped, but it was just so many people sent poems, and that was not. We did not have the employee base to sift through all that because we thought it'll be fine with just the 2 of us because like who's going to respond to this? We're going to solicit a few people.
So you underestimated the
well, because it's such like a weird intersection that because we weren't seeing that in literature, and we knew that this community was out there, but also we're asking a lot of people to essentially out themselves in this book. You know, it's not. We're asking people to do a dangerous thing. So I wasn't expecting anyone to be like, yeah, sure, let me put myself on the line out there with you. I wouldn't. I kind of I'm like, how dare I ask someone to do that in the first place? And people came out in droves. It's amazing. So it's also just really heartening to think that for so many of us, you spend your whole life thinking that you're the only one who fails in this particular way, or you spend your whole life thinking that you're the only one who intersects in this specific way because there's no literature or media or anything supplementing the idea that there is a community like this out there because of the way that media is curated and the way that the gatekeepers function. Again, anytime someone is saying anything about Muslim identity, it's like a Muslim man either being like, you know, don't worry, white people, we're just like you. I too like pork and date white men, you know, or it's like someone being like, oh, those poor Muslim women, let's like take their scarves up and put them in a goddamn bikini and free them, you know? So it's always like people like talking about us or not talking about us at all. So I was like, you know, maybe it's because no one is out there. And it turns out
so not true.
When we turned in the manuscript, the publisher asked us to cut like 50 pages because it was too long and it was apparently really expensive to print. But you know, so that we had enough and it also it's edited like for craft as well. It's not just that we as much
whoever
as
comes in will
it's not like whoever comes in will take. It was still like we also want them to be beautiful poems and compelling essays. So with people who represent those intersections and write really well, we ended up with this massive manuscript and we sent it up to Haymarket like, here you go, 3 years later, sorry we're late. And they're like, yeah, this is great, it's 50 pages too long, please. Thank you so much for this manuscript, but you need to cut some because it's going to be not just prohibitive printing costs, but then the book is going to be so expensive that that we're going to end up keeping a readership out if it's like a thick $40 textbook, you know? Again, I don't remember the original question, but love Halal, if you hear me, had a great time working on it.
I think it's important because it's important that people know what kind of book is now being made available to the world.
And it also, I will say, the project's not finished, you know? I think I don't even dare say that we scratched the surface of what is available in these communities, in these voices. But at least now we have an artifact that can hopefully start the conversation and expand the conversation and the gaze in general and populate it with voices that are actually more representative of what the Muslim population as a whole looks like. It's not just straight Arab men.
Yes, I mean, this, like you said, this is part of a series of work. I think Kevin did the first one, Breakbeats, Poets.
Kevin and Nate and Kurish, and then volume 2 is Black Girl Magic.
Black Girl Magic, and then it's just 3, and then there's going to be a Hispanic one.
Latin Next, which comes out next year. And then I think Hanif and Jessica Hopper are editing one about punk.
So there's a lot more coming out. So let's ask some questions. If we have a lovely little crowd here, any questions you'd like for Safia? So I don't take up the airwaves.
Could you read the poem?
Oh, that's
I will be reading in the lobby at 8:15.
Ah, okay.
We just got the sign in the back that said we have a time
Yeah.
warning, so.
We've got about 5 minutes, so get your questions in. No questions?
Oh,
All right,
no.
all right, so what are you working on right now? I know that the last time I saw you online, you were doing something with Jamelia, like for her music video.
I got to live my lifelong dream of being a music video girl.
Jamelia Woods she's got a new album out, is that right?
The album comes out in May, but she just dropped the video for her single Eartha, which is a tribute to Eartha Kitt. And I got to.
And the video's gone viral?
Oh, I don't know. It came out yesterday.
Came
I
out
don't know
yesterday.
what
All right, so if you want to check her out online, that's something good to check out. Safia Mafia.
And then as far as I'm working very slowly on a second poetry book, which is going to be a book-length poem. I'm just taking for fucking ever.
You're obsessed again.
I'm not, in a different way. Where with the January Children, I was obsessed with the concept. With Girls That Never Die is because I'm obsessed with the form. So the title of the book comes from an Old Dirty Bastard lyric, which I misheard my whole life. From Ghetto Superstar, he says, "I'm hanging out partying with girls, break, that never die." I my whole life heard it, "I'm hanging out partying with girls that never die." So it's a book-length poem, and because after I finished writing The January Children, I was like, well, I don't know how to write a poem outside of the context of working on this book. It's been years of my life.
It's a powerful construct.
Well, it just was like my forever prompt, every time I sat down to write, I knew what I was doing. And then I finished the book, which is honestly not ever the plan. So after that, whenever I sat down to write, I was like, well, I'm not obsessed with anything. I spent years of my life writing this book, and then I finished the book. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was the one book I had in me. So part of the way that I kind of started to get my sea legs back is I started doing little exercises in form just for myself. I'd be like, today I'm going to write a sonnet. Today I'm going to write a sestina. Today I'm going to write whatever. And that...
I'm doing haikus to get myself back into shape.
Yeah, because it's such it's protective in that if I write a bad sonnet, it's because I don't know how to write a sonnet, not because I don't know how to write a poem. So, and it felt like so much pressure at the time, like, okay, I have to sit down and prove to myself that I can still do it. So with those little formal exercises, I was like, well, can't write a sestina because it's hard, not because I'm like a failure as a writer.
Yes, I get it.
So,
You got a question on that? I was looking this way. No? Don't be a cook.
don't put people on the spot.
When she comes out here, I don't want you following her and saying, "Excuse me, sir." No, you had your time. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. I wanted to ask, what's the most important element for you of craft?
I like you. That was what I was going to ask. Bless you. May you live forever.
Most important. So,
'Cause
I
you got
think
some chops.
these are twinned aspects for me. Is I'm very interested in diction and in syntax. I love like a weird, juicy verb that's doing something it's not supposed to be doing in English, and I love a sentence that is like arranged incorrectly, because it's so it for me that's the English, not even the English, but it's the language that I grew up hearing. That kind of attempt at and failure to translate, where I come up with the thought in one language and then translate it to a language that doesn't have the same syntax, so the sentence comes out in the wrong order, it's the English that I grew up hearing my family speak, where like, we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to tell a quick story that I think is really cute, and then we're going to get out of here.
Sure.
In Arabic, there is no difference between the words for like and love. And we were at a restaurant once, and my grandfather, I think, wanted to say, I would like some tomato soup. And he just kept saying to the waitress, I love tomato soup, I love tomato soup. And that's what I'm interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Safia, for being an amazing writer. May your next book have the same success as this book. Thank you.
May there be a next book.
No, I believe there will be. I have faith in you.